On any analysis, it was a profoundly moving occasion. The Duke's family, the military, his closest aides, all paid tribute to the man they had loved and admired. But there was no mistaking the heartache. The Queen sitting alone, head often bowed, only feet away from the man she had so loved for so long. The final farewell was designed by the Duke himself, a call to action stations, an instruction perhaps to seize the day ahead. If so, it was one his grandchildren heeded, two brothers falling back into step in a moment of reconciliation amidst the sorrow. Also on News at 10 tonight. All eyes may have been on Windsor, but the Duke's life and service were celebrated across the nation today. It was a moment for those who knew him best to reflect on what his life had meant for them.
He didn't change. He was the same when he was young as he was when he died, I think. I just feel sad.
In other news, spectators at snooker, another step back to post-COVID normality as indoor crowds are tested for the first time. And he did love his time there, and today pupils of the Duke's former school paid their own tribute.
One thing I would say is thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you for allowing me to have the best education.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. Prince Philip had agreed long ago that there was to be no eulogy at his funeral. At today's pared-back ceremony at Windsor, there was, in a way, no need. Reminders of his years of service were all around. But even the evidence of a long life, well lived, was no protection against the raw power of loss. The most poignant image of the day, the Queen, head often bent, only yards from the mortal remains of the man who had been such a force in her life, the source of so much shared love. The armed forces did them both proud, passing off their duties with a precision the Duke would have admired, indeed probably expected, and he would have approved too of the sight of his grandsons, William and Harry, walking and talking together as if the difficulties of the past year had melted away amidst the sorrow of his passing. Tonight at Windsor, comforted by her family and her faith, the Queen will be contemplating life after Philip, knowing once mourning is over, he would want her to follow still her sense of duty as he followed his.
From the moment the green Land Rover drove quietly into the quadrangle of this great castle, it was every inch Prince Philip's funeral. The service detachments, his detachments, who had assembled here moments before, bowed their heads. The coffin emerged from the state entrance on the shoulders of 8 Grenadier Guardsmen. And a reminder, if one were needed, that this was not just a military funeral. The children and grandchildren of the Duke of Edinburgh lined up behind. And then, from the Sovereign's entrance, his widow. With a lady in waiting beside her, it was a moment, just for once, for the Queen to follow her husband. It is private grief lived in the public domain. The royal family has been here before, but when they stepped off, the Duke reminded them of his happy moments, carriage driving, his ponies were there, so too his cap and gloves and his red pot for sugar lumps. On the coffin, a wreath from the Queen and a simple message, in loving memory. And from the rest of the family waiting at the chapel, a bow of heads. In this past week, they have all pledged to look after the Queen. And as she walked alone into St George's Chapel, a moment's pause, so she could go inside with others. At the West Steps, a new bearer party found by the Royal Marines, whose job was to carry their former Captain General and stop for the national minute's silence. On his coffin, the naval cap and sword of this World War II veteran, and his personal flag, quartered for Greece, for Denmark, for Mountbatten and for Edinburgh. In front of the altar, the Queen was sitting on her own. How difficult must this moment have been?
We have been inspired by his unwavering loyalty to our Queen, by his service to the nation and the Commonwealth, by his courage, fortitude and faith.
Eternal Father, strong to save, whose hand doth bind the restless wave.
At many a Navy funeral, they sing Eternal Father Strong to Save. A Navy man and royal consort, but also a father and a grandpa.
Oh, hear us when we cry to thee for those in peril.
We remember before thee this day Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, rendering thanks unto thee for his resolute faith and loyalty, for his high sense of duty and integrity, for his life of service to the nation and Commonwealth.
It was into the royal vault that this consort was lowered, in a chapel which has been at the heart of royal family life and death for centuries. And after the interment, a request from the Duke that he had specifically asked for. The Royal Marine buglers sounded action stations. On a Navy ship, it demands all hands should go to battle stations. It was Prince Philip's way of saying, now get back to work. For the Queen, that work will continue alone, but she does have her family to provide some of that support, however hard today was for many of them. And it might also be a moment to reflect on the tensions of the last year for his grandsons William and Harry. Perhaps Prince Philip's funeral will provide the opportunity for some much needed coming together. Chris Ship, News at 10, Windsor.
It wasn't just, of course, at Windsor that a minute's silence was observed. At 3 o'clock across the country, silence fell. People observed it not just to pay their respects to the Prince himself, but to make clear their support of the Queen.
In every corner of the country, they stood to remember a man who served it for so long. A minute's silence, bookended by a single shot. Guns fired in both the city that bears the Duke's title and in every one of the home nations. On a day when politicians and the public alike were asked to reflect in private, this was the people's moment to show their support for the Queen. And at the Tower of London, they did just that.
I think the Queen will be lonely now, so I thought it's good to come here and support them.
It's a big loss to the Queen, and none of us, to mourn someone, you want to do it in private, and clearly she can't do that, so you really feel for her today.
They stood in socially distanced silence at Birmingham New Street, reflecting on all the Duke had given.
I think we've lost a great man. Obviously his spirit will live on among all of us. It's a sad day for the whole of the UK and the Commonwealth as well.
It would have been nice for him to get to 100, but nevertheless I think his contribution has been massive to the country.
In Ascot, they followed the Duke's final journey on television, remembering him in the most apt of locations.
It's an end of an era, isn't it? So, 99 years. I think that we need to come out and show our respects as well.
With lockdown, it's taken its toll, and we can pay tribute to a tradition most of us have known all our lives.
In Sandringham, where people might have gathered in different times, they left flowers instead. A grateful nation paying simple tribute to the most remarkable of men. Rachel Younger, News at 10.
For a man of many interests and great energy, it isn't surprising he touched and even changed so many lives, from close friends to those he only met once. Today was an emotional one as they reflected on what the Prince had meant to them.
I'm very glad I knew him when we were young.
Robin watched the nation pay tribute from a unique perspective. Not only has she lived through the same 10 decades as Prince Philip, she's 100, but she was also his friend.
I must be one of the very, very few people alive who remember when we were both young. Both Prince Philip and myself were young and had fun in the war.
Back then, Robin was in a relationship with David Mountbatten, the Duke's cousin and best friend.
I'm sad as one sad when any friend dies, and I think he didn't change. He was the same when he was young as he was when he died, I think. I just feel sad.
The person I was when I was 17 and the person I was after doing the scheme are two different people.
In Brighton, someone just starting out on a life of duty. Medical student Joel. He met the Duke of Edinburgh through his award scheme, an experience he says changed his life.
Watching the funeral for me was personally very sad and very moving, and I think it was a really brilliant moment for all of us to just pause and say, you know what, thank you, Prince Philip, for all the things that you've contributed to. Thank you for the things that you've done.
In some ways a hard taskmaster. He wanted it right. It always had to be right.
Philip Bateman knew the Duke for 37 years, bonding over their shared love of horses and carriage driving.
Of course I'll miss him. Me and thousands of others.
Very few from the Duke's generation are here today to mark his passing, but many, old and young, will feel his loss. Rebecca Barry, News at 10.
Prince Philip's life was remembered beyond these shores too, in countries which had a special connection with him. In Malta, there was a 9-gun salute. Flowers and pictures were also laid outside what's left of the villa where the Queen and Prince Philip lived during the first years of their marriage. Bells rang out in Stockholm in Sweden this morning ahead of the funeral. The Duke was made a Knight of Sweden's most prominent order, the Order of the Seraphim, in 1954. And a special commemoration was held in Canada. Its Prime Minister, Justin Trudeau, paid tribute to the Duke, calling him a man of great service. Now, this is clearly a good moment to go back to Chris in Windsor and see what he made of today. Chris, I think for a lot of people, I mean, anyone who's lost anyone, particularly anyone who's lost anyone in everything that's happened in the past year, the sight of the Queen sitting only yards for this man she'd loved, you know, clearly with great passion over decades. I mean, it was heartbreaking, wasn't it?
It was, Tom, and you know, sometimes one of the more difficult things about this job is to find the right words to sum up a day like today. It was certainly a small piece of history, but we are talking about two very different days. One was saying goodbye to a man who's been part of national life since 1947, also saying goodbye to yet another veteran of the Second World War. But on another level, it was a day of intense personal grief for the Queen, for her children, for her grandchildren. And you're right, I thought she cut a very lonely figure inside St George's Chapel today because of the social distancing, but also because other members of her family were in their household bubble, and she's clearly lost her household bubble. And I think for someone who's going to be 95 next week, that is going to be very difficult to bear over these coming weeks and months. But she will be acutely aware that she's not alone, that many people have been suffering and many people have had to go through these slimmed down funerals like she had today over this past difficult year.
Well, one thing will have warmed, I'm sure, her heart, certainly the Duke's, were he still alive, is to see the two grandchildren, William and Harry, chatting apparently amicably as they left the chapel.
Yeah, I think most people would recognise it quite often after a funeral as a moment to pause and to reflect, and actually seeing William and Harry as they came out of St George's Chapel and walked back up towards Middle Ward. It was, I think perhaps many people watching that will be heartened to see that they are at least talking again, even if they haven't been talking very much over the past couple of years. And perhaps that is, you know, one thing that people will take away on the positive side from today.
OK, Chris, remarkable day. Thank you very much indeed. Let's move on to the day's other news now. And spectators were allowed into an indoor sports event, the World Snooker Championship at the Crucible in Sheffield. The audience was restricted to a third of normal capacity, and while there were no COVID passports, people did have to show they tested negative.
This could be how we attend large-scale events from now on. Not just showing your ticket, but a text proving a negative COVID test too.
Suddenly to be here and actually being able to see something live and not on a screen, it's going to be brilliant.
Really looking forward to it. It's good to get out of the house and do something a bit different other than just sitting at home.
And this is what they'd been waiting for, feeling the tension and excitement of sport in person. This is the first event in the government's pilot scheme testing large gatherings in different settings. The size of the crowd here will gradually increase over the next 17 days. Then, almost 1,000 fans will watch the final.
There's certainly a lot of weight on our shoulders. It's not just about us. What we're doing is actually producing something here which may be replicated for other events, and that's not just in sport. It's for theatres, it's for cinemas, it's for every indoor venue that you could ever imagine. So we're very keen to make sure we make a great success for everybody.
To attend, fans must have proof of a negative lateral flow test taken at a government site. That's even if you've had the vaccine. COVID passports aren't being trialled here. You don't just have to be a snooker fan to be invested in how this tournament plays out. What happens in this theatre over the next few weeks will determine how restrictions are eased and how larger gatherings can happen for us all. Today, people were making the most of the freedoms they have now, while next door offered a glimpse of the freedoms of the future. Ellie Pitt, News at 10, Sheffield.
And tomorrow, fans will also be returning to football's big time for the first time since COVID restrictions were imposed. 4,000 spectators will be allowed into Wembley for the second FA Cup semi-final. But tonight, in an empty stadium, the first semi-final ended in a 1-0 victory for Chelsea against Manchester City. Sport was, of course, a passion of Prince Philip's as a younger man and at Gordonston School, where he was captain of both cricket and hockey. It was also there, of course, that he fell in love with sailing and indeed the sea. He kept in touch with the school right till the very end, and today the school's famous past pupil was remembered by those following in his footsteps more than 80 years on.
Overlooking the waters where the young Philip once learned to sail, this was the Gordonston School's own farewell to a prince and a pupil.
We gather here today to honour the memory of Prince Philip, and by launching this wreath, we symbolically let go of this good friend of Gordonston.
On the harbour walls, a Gordonston goodbye. Prince Philip arrived here in September of 1934, only the 10th pupil at the boarding school. He thrived beyond the classroom in sports, but he found his calling at sea. In photographs just released, the future Admiral of the Fleet in the Royal Navy can be seen aboard the Gordonston school yacht and doing the washing up on deck. After leaving, Prince Philip kept in touch with his old school. The Duke's last letter to the current principal arrived here just after his passing.
I think there aren't many schools who have one individual who links their year of their foundation to the present day. The Gordonston education that he loved so much has been shared and will continue to be shared with children all around the world through the Duke of Edinburgh's award, and for us that is the most wonderful legacy.
Pupils and staff fell silent with the nation today. But there was another remembrance unique to Gordonston. A morning run to the Murray coast and back, just as the young Philip used to do. His lasting legacy here is to broaden the horizons of children. The Prince Philip Foundation now funds bursaries for 1/3 of Gordonston pupils, like Heiso from Rwanda.
Even though he's not here at this time, one thing I would say is thank you so much for giving me this opportunity. Thank you for allowing me to have the best education anyone could ever want. Yes, so thank you so much, sir.
Today the nation said farewell to a prince and the royal family said goodbye to a relative. But here at Gordonston, they have honoured one of their own. Peter Smith, News at 10, Murray.
Prince Philip's funeral was smaller than even he had planned, but it did have an intensity that a bigger occasion might not have matched. Scaled down, it distilled important elements of his life: the church that held him close, the armed forces who held him dear, and of course the family who held him dearer still. Since Prince Philip died at Windsor 8 days ago, people have been trying to thread together the words to sum up one of this country's great lives. Tonight we leave you with those of a professional, the poet laureate. Simon Armitage, in a poem published today and which he has read for us. It is entitled The Patriarchs, an Elegy, paying tribute to the Prince and those of his generation. It has been a remarkable day. From all of us, good night and thank you for watching.
The weather in the window this morning is snow, unseasonal singular flakes, a slow winter's final shiver. On such an occasion, to presume to eulogise one man is to pipe up for a whole generation. That crew whose survival was always the stuff of minor miracle, who came ashore in orange crate coracles, fought ingenious wars, finagled triumphs at sea with flaming decoy boats and sidestepped torpedoes. Husbands to duty, They unrolled their plans across billiard tables and vehicle bonnets, regrouped at breakfast. What their secrets were was everyone's guess and nobody's business. Great-grandfathers from birth, in time they became both inner core and outer case in a family heirloom of nesting dolls. Like evidence of early man, their boot prints stand in the hardened earth of rosebeds and borders. They were sons of a zodiac out of sync with the solar year, but turned their minds to the day's big science and heavy questions. To study their hands at rest was to picture maps showing hatchet valleys and indigo streams, schemes of old campaigns and reconnaissance missions. Last of the great avuncular magicians, they kept their best tricks for the grand finale, disproving immortality and disappearing entirely. Major oaks in the wood start tuning up, and skies to come will deliver their tributes. But for now, a cold April's closing moments parachute slowly home, so by mid-afternoon, snow is recast as seed heads and thistledown.